So when I was in college, I took this speech class, and the way this class worked, of course, is that the students would each have to pick a topic, go write a speech about it. This speech would have to have sources, facts, as many as you could muster, and you would have to present this speech to the class. Well, the first topic for a speech that I chose was political correctness, because as a headstrong college student, I did not like people telling me what to say, what to think, and whether or not I could voice the truth or my opinions. So, naturally, as you might guess, this speech did not go over too well with my teacher, telling the whole class that we should be able to speak our minds and speak the truth and not be censored, or to censor ourselves. This did not go over too well with my very liberal college instructor. So she challenged me in front of the entire class to write a speech from the opposite perspective, to give a speech in favor of political correctness, in favor of censorship and censoring oneself. What could be the positive side of that? And naturally, I didn't see any positive side of that. That's why I did not take her up on that challenge, at least not immediately. Then, towards the end of the semester, um, I, mind you, this was back in 2015, so this is right around the time, shortly after Caitlyn Jenner became a thing. After Bruce Jenner came out and went through the whole procedure and tried to become a woman. So this was pretty frontal in a lot of people's minds. So I decided to write a speech about the difference between men and women. You can only imagine how well that went over with my super liberal teacher. um, but so I gave this speech about the differences between men and women because I thought, okay, I can be quirky. This can be fun. Just a little speech about basic biology. Nothing huge. But at the end of this speech, or rather, forgive me, I never actually got to give this speech because the teacher, when she looked at it, because we had to submit these drafts to our teacher for approval, she looked at it and said, in front of the entire class, you cannot give this speech because you are promoting rape culture. Yeah. She said that in front of the entire lecture hall, very loudly too, because I said that men and women are different. Well, that ticked me off. So I had to write a new speech, and guess which topic I chose? I chose to take up her challenge. I chose to give a speech in favor of political correctness. Only I was going to do every single word of that speech satirically. Every single word of this speech was going to be dripping with satire, with sarcasm. And so, and because the timetable was so short, I never actually got the chance to submit this draft to the teacher for approval. So she had no idea what I was going to say. So I got up in front of the class. This is the last day of this speech class, last day of the semester. So I was never going to have to see her again, so I wasn't that worried. So I got up in front of the entire class and just gave my speech on political correctness, and the entire class was just dying because they knew exactly what I was doing. um, I opened up the speech with how great it is that we can shut each other up if we're offended. How wonderful political correctness is because it forces you to censor yourself, and thus nobody's feelings get hurt. And I brought graphs and charts and everything. I was citing actual sources. I was giving actual facts, but the statements were all something to the effect of these one-liners, like, "I guess we should make an effort to avoid offending people because being offended can actually have a negative impact on your physical health. That's right. People who are offended have a 100% chance of dying at the end of their life." That is pretty much the entire speech. Just right there. You get the idea. So everyone in the class is dying of laughter except for my teacher, who is up front and her face is turning purple. So she was not happy. And so to conclude my speech, I had brought in a box with me, a prop, if you will. So I opened up the box at the very end of my speech and pulled out homemade participation trophies. I had gone to the Walmart and gotten plastic wine glasses and spray painted them gold, wrote participation on them with Sharpie, and I handed them out to the entire class. And it's no wonder that my college professors did not like me very much. There's probably a reason I didn't finish.
Well, that makes you a moron.
So why did I make such a big deal about political correctness back then? Why do I still make such a big deal, such a big fuss over the concept of political correctness, over censorship of others or of oneself? Well, because at the core of it, I am called by my God to stand for the truth, for truth itself, as well as, of course, for the truth of Him. But political correctness by its nature, by design, is meant to suppress the truth, is meant to keep you from speaking the truth as you see it, from saying things that might offend somebody else, even if those things are the truth. If the truth offends you, then I'm not supposed to say it to you. That's the problem that I have with it.
Silence!
And because political correctness at its core is cowardice. PC equals cowardice. And cowardice is, of course, the absence of courage. It is the absence of courage, and courage is the prerequisite to all other virtues. You have to have courage in order to be virtuous, in order to live out your faith, in order to live out your good virtues. You have to be courageous in order to do that pretty much all of the time. So political correctness equals cowardice, and cowardice equals the absence of all virtue. And when we have the absence of all virtue, well, it's not really a wonder why I'm such an opponent of this deal, of this monstrosity that I call political correctness. So contrary to popular belief, political correctness is not, in fact, virtuous. It is to suppress the truth and to suppress virtue by extension. It is not a good thing, and because political correctness is ultimately the absence of virtue, this is why we end up with, extremely politically correct, woke, progressive Christian pastors like this Zach Lambert that I keep running into online. I keep seeing people post his stuff and hailing him as a great truth teller or truth yeller, as the case may be, and it's just not true. This is just a so-called pastor who has fully embraced political correctness and the woke culture, and thus is a coward because he is running tail between his legs from the woke mob, or just trying to placate and please them, while completely surrendering or stamping upon the truth of God, of the gospel, what have you. So I'm going to attempt to talk about this without my blood pressure rising too high, because talking about this guy, or just looking into this guy, always seems to get me riled up, because he's just so infuriating for many reasons. The first message of his that has me up in arms, because I keep on seeing it over and over again on social media. Friends of mine keep on sharing it like it's some great prophetic saying. These are Christian people who are buying into what this guy is selling. The first tweet that has me hot and bothered from this guy is as follows. The vast majority of people walking away from Christianity in America are not rejecting the person and work of Christ. They are rejecting faulty biblical interpretations that lead to bigotry, oppression, and marginalization. This rejection isn't unchristian, it is Christ-like. So first, let me just start with the obvious here. The first thing that bothers me about this is that leaving Christianity is not Christ-like. Can we at least acknowledge that this is a flat-out lie? That rejecting Christianity, that rejecting God's word is rejecting Jesus. I mean, that's just what's happening here. If you reject Jesus, if you reject the things that he has said, if you reject his biblical morality, you are rejecting Jesus. This is not Christ-like. I mean, this is as glaring an example of false witness as I could possibly show you. I mean, saying that leaving Christianity is Christian is ridiculous. Saying that you exemplify Christ by rejecting him is ridiculous. But moving on to this point that he makes about rejecting faulty biblical interpretations that lead to bigotry, oppression, and marginalization, let's observe what he's actually referring to as those things. So, I've actually looked into his history, things that he's said in the past, and I've concluded that he is actually claiming that it is wrong for Christians to uphold and stand by biblical sexual morality. That's what's going on here. This guy has actually come out in favor of transing the children. Talk about political correctness leading to the absence of virtue. Are you kidding me? We'll get more into that later. I don't want to digress too much here. I told you my blood pressure was probably going to rise. But this guy has concluded that the central goal of his church ought to be inclusivity, that we ought to accept all choices and lifestyles as equal, that if we were really Christ-like, then what we would do is basically enable people in their pursuit of immoral and destructive behaviors and just kind of love them through the consequences after. But the church is not supposed to be inclusive to everybody's personal choices or lifestyle. That's the political correctness talking. That's the absence of virtue. No, that is not the function or purpose of the church. Yes, we are supposed to accept people as they are. Absolutely. I mean, the church would be empty if we didn't do that. But this is with the expectation that that who they are change after they accept Jesus Christ. This is what is known as being born again. This is sanctification. If you come to church and you accept Christ, the expectation is that you change, not that you continue in destructive and sinful behaviors. This idea that we should cater to those who do not wish to accept biblical teachings, that we ought to yield to the world and be inclusive to people involved in sexual sin, just be inclusive to them and accept them as they are rather than seek to aid and rehabilitate them, is flatly wrong. Respectfully, you would not go to the doctor with the expectation that he affirms your illness rather than treating it. Sin is an illness that we are all afflicted with, and we all need treatment from Christ. When we shun his rules, when we shun his word, we are rejecting that treatment. Let me be clear. If someone you know or love or care about is involved in the destructive behavior, whether it's destructive to themselves or to others or to both, as the case may very well be, especially if the destructive behavior is sexual in nature, and your response is to condone their behavior, perhaps even celebrate them or affirm them by saying, yes, I'm so happy for you, you're living your authentic self, I have news for you. That is not love. That is not compassion. That is apathy. You are not caring enough to stand in the way or intervene or question their destructive behavior. In saying to your loved ones, I do not care what you do whatever you want, live your best life, you are throwing them to their own self-destruction. You are tossing them into their own lion's den. If an individual, for example, is intent on mutilating their own body to appear more like a member of the opposite sex, and you simply let that happen without a word, that is not acceptance. At the very best, that is indifference. You are indifferent to their condition. You don't care enough to stand in the way of their self-destruction. You are just trying to avoid an uncomfortable confrontation. You are just trying to avoid conflict. That is cowardice. There's that PC talking again. It is cowardice to do so. That individual might not appreciate an intervention at first, but guess what? Sometimes the most loving thing that you can do for somebody is to simply say no. No, this is not good for you. No, doing this is not in your best interest or that of anybody else. This is not a good thing, so no. And if you disagree with the statement that saying no is often to somebody's benefit, that saying no is often the most loving thing you can do, if you disagree with that, then the next time that you see a 4-year-old child trying to play in the middle of a busy road with cars zooming by, remember that you took the position that it is unloving to stand in the way of somebody's self-destruction. But obviously, progressive Christian pastors, I use both terms Christian and pastor very fast and loose there. I'm being very generous with those terms, but obviously they disagree with me wholeheartedly on this. To them, I suppose political correctness is the highest of all virtues. Avoiding offending people is the greatest thing that you can do, right? Shrinking away from the truth. So political correctness has taken such a hold of them that they have moved beyond cowardice towards the complete absence of virtue here. It's an incremental process. You shut down the truth and you end up in the absence of all virtue. You end up in this place with saying things like this. This is also from Pastor Zach Lambert. So this is a response from Zach Lambert to the Texas governor declaring that transing the kids is in fact child abuse, which is just a very accurate statement. But he made this law, and so this guy, Zach Lambert, decides to post 1.8 million LGBTQ youth seriously consider suicide each year, and at least one attempts suicide every 45 seconds. Okay, I will stop and acknowledge that is in fact true. That is tragic. Suicide is a horrible thing. We can at least agree on that basis. Okay, he's presenting just enough truth here to make himself convincing. Suicide is a terrible thing, and we do not want that. It's awful. And we do want to help people with that. But he continues. Trans youth are 2.5 times more likely to attempt suicide than their cis LGBTQ peers. He says kids will die because of this bigoted directive from Greg Abbott. This is evil. So do you notice the language here? This guy is talking about LGBTQ kids. He's talking about lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender kids. Transsexual kids. Okay, the word kid and the word sexual should not be in the same sentence. Okay, you should not be assigning a sexual identity to a child. You weirdo. Okay, I'm sorry. This is why I was so worried about getting angry during this video, because this just bothers me so much. Okay, you know what? Yes, we can agree on the fact that suicide rates are very high and getting higher for these kids. But do you know why those suicide rates are high and are getting higher as this madness progresses? Because these sick adults and sick parents are turning these children into dolls. They are injecting them with hormones and puberty blockers and trying to convince little boys that they're little girls and little girls that they're boys, and that these kids have no agency here. They have no decision-making process that is happening. They don't know what's going on. The parents do, and that's why they need to be stopped. This is sick stuff. And guess what? You are enabling this, so-called Pastor Lambert. You are not only allowing this to happen, you are promoting it. You know what, let the kids just play with their Legos and their Lincoln Logs. Are Lincoln Logs still a thing? Doesn't matter. Just let these kids be kids. Can we just point out, this stuff did not exist when I was a kid, right? Suicide rates among children were not as high as they are now because this stuff did not exist when I was a child. This stuff is being pushed on them, and these kids are being confused with this transgender ideology, and sick pastors like this, who have fallen for the political correctness, the absence of truth, and the complete void absence of anything virtuous, they have fallen into this, and now they are so morally depraved that they are promoting it. If you are okay with this happening to kids, you do not speak for Christ. Do not dare invoke the name of Jesus. Okay. You know what? Dante Alighieri, author of the Divine Comedy. He wrote in the Divine Comedy that frauds and false prophets, he wrote them into the 8th circle of hell, which is the second worst circle. I think there's a pretty good reason for that, because this false witness stuff, this false prophet stuff, this bearing false witness, these leading people astray, pretty much. This has eternal consequences. This not only destroys people's lives, but this can destroy their eternity. One of the most famous, one of the most oft-quoted lines from Dante's Divine Comedy, from the Inferno, is as follows. This is from Canto 26. He says, "You were not made to live like brutes, but to pursue virtue and knowledge." And of course, most people who quote this line, as many as there are, most of them quote this with reverence, right? This is a great quote. Man, that Dante says some good stuff, right? Well, and I understand why they might think that, but what the reader would do well to understand and remember is that when this is said, first of all, Dante is not saying this. I mean, he wrote this, but there was a dialogue happening here, and the person who said it was Ulysses, who was condemned to the eighth circle of hell for fraud, for fraudulent counsel. So Dante is telling us that this is the height of all fraud, of all fraudulent counsel. That's what's going on here, and I understand. You're like, well, what's wrong with that? What's wrong with saying that we were not made to live like brutes and that we ought to pursue virtue and knowledge? And I understand that question because I've asked it myself. I actually had to be watched through this myself. But the problem is that Ulysses, in his pursuit of these things, he ultimately abandoned all other bonds, commitments, all other responsibilities that he had. He abandoned pretty much anything good in the pursuit of what is good. You can see where that would conflict. In his pursuit of knowledge, virtue, of new experiences, he abandoned his child, he abandoned his wife, his father, his family. He abandoned everything, all of his obligations. And ultimately, he led himself and his entire crew to their demise. And he ultimately he says he blames another, and that's another with a capital A. He's of course referring to God. He blames God for his own fall. He says the great enemy of his experience, the great enemy of his virtue and his gaining of knowledge, according to Ulysses, the great enemy of these things is God. The enemy of virtue is God. And so Dante was right. This is the height of all false counsel. You could not get much worse than this. God is the enemy of everything that is good. He's the enemy of knowledge. He is the enemy of virtue. Ulysses, in this Divine Comedy, basically said, I wanted to experience great things. I wanted to pursue knowledge, and I wanted to seek after virtue. The only thing standing in my way was God. That is what it means to be engrossed in political correctness, to be so concerned with the false virtue of avoiding offense by trying to spare someone's feelings so hard that you sidestep the truth, and to so avoid the truth that you lose sight of what is true and of what the standard of truth and virtue is. To commit yourself to political correctness is to commit yourself to lies, and ultimately to lose your grip on what is good and the standard of good and virtue, which is God. When the truth and meaning of virtue and of the good becomes obscure to you, your moral compass does not know which way to point. And you end up like a pastor who spreads lies, defends insanity, and promotes the abuse and harm of the most innocent among us. If you think that it is bigotry or oppression to say that a 13 or 14-year-old girl should not be encouraged to have her body surgically mutilated and to have her breasts removed, among other things, because she mistakenly thinks that she is a boy, then you are part of the problem. The loving and compassionate response is not to let that poor young girl destroy herself and her body. It is to help her to establish or reestablish, as the case may be, her connection to the truth. And the truth is that she was born without a Y chromosome. She is a girl. God made her the way that she is on purpose, because the way that she is beautiful to him. And one cannot improve upon God's creation. To let this allowing this young girl to remain in the shadow of lies would not be Christ-like. The Lord is truth, and he cannot abide by lies nor speak one. Do you honestly think that Jesus Christ, that his response to a young girl who thinks she's a boy would be to say to her, yes, if you think you're a boy, then perhaps you maybe are one. Maybe my father made a mistake. Do you think that somehow I don't see Jesus doing that? I don't see Jesus lying to a young girl and telling her that she is anything but what she is. So no, it is not Christ-like to trans the kids. As Christians, we are to stand for virtue. We are to uphold what is good and righteous, and we are to show mercy, love, and compassion while sharing and standing for the truth. If the truth is offensive to you, that is a sure sign that you are not living in it. Now, a final word to the false teachers out there who claim to be speaking the truth of Christ. You can lie to yourself if you genuinely believe it. You can lie to your fans or your followers if you know they won't question it. But don't lie to me and expect me to enable it. To everybody else out there, I appreciate you taking the time to watch and listen. Thank you so much for your time, and God bless you.